It's quiet backstage. Not the kind of quiet you get before a performance. This silence is heavier. It hums with the weight of memories. A single leather chair sits center stage, the spotlight dimmed low, casting long shadows against the velvet curtains. Somewhere off in the distance, a laugh track plays on a loop. Faint, almost ghostly. It sounds like yesterday. Simon Cowell, once the thunderous voice of television's most powerful franchise, sits alone. His shoulders, once squared with authority, slope just slightly now. His famously sharp eyes are dulled, not by time, but by something deeper, something broken. At 65, Simon Cowell has everything: a legacy, a family, wealth that needs no counting. And yet, behind the crisp black suits and clever sarcasm lies a grief too vast to measure. Because no one tells you what happens after the curtain call. No one prepares you for the moment when the very stars you helped shape vanish. When the voices you elevated to glory fall silent. He wasn't just the man behind One Direction. He was their architect, their anchor. And when one of those voices, Liam Payne, fell in October of 2024, so did something in Simon. He didn't just cry, he collapsed. And now, behind the TV smile, beneath the gleam of success, a tragedy unfolds. Quietly, unbearably, this is the heartbreak of Simon Cowell. Unseen, unspoken until now. Chapter 1. The Rise and the Mask. Before the heartbreak, before the headlines, before he became the arbiter of pop culture dreams and disasters, Simon Cowell was just a young man trying to find his place in a world that didn't see him coming. Born in 1959 in Lambeth, South London, Simon was one of 5 children, the son of a ballet dancer and a music executive. His father, Eric Cowell, was a quiet influence, disciplined, traditional, and deeply proud. His mother, Julie, was the heart of the household, intuitive and expressive. Simon was neither fully his father nor fully his mother. He was something else entirely. Ambitious, but wary. Loud, but guarded. He drifted in his early years, bounced from school to school, worked odd jobs, dropped out of college. A young man allergic to structure but drawn to power. He found a place at EMI Music Publishing, thanks to his father's connections, and began the slow crawl up a ladder no one expected him to climb. Then came the real game changer. Pop Idol in the UK, followed by American Idol in the US. The world was about to meet the man behind the scowl. To the public, Simon Cowell was pure lightning. His critiques were savage poetry, his timing impeccable. He could crush a dream with a smirk and resurrect a career with a nod. Audiences loved to hate him. And then, somewhere along the way, just loved him. But this was no accident, it was a performance. Behind the scenes, Simon's reputation as a brutal judge masked a deeply strategic mind. He wasn't chasing fame, he was manufacturing it for others. He wasn't simply judging talent, he was sculpting the industry in his image. Pop stars weren't just born, they were Cowell-made. Yet the more successful he became, the more invisible the real Simon became. The man who rolled his eyes on camera was, in private, notoriously shy. The mogul who commanded multi-million-dollar productions spent many nights alone in hotel rooms watching classic cartoons. Friends described him as obsessive, private, even lonely. Romance, too, was elusive. An endless carousel of models, socialites, missed connections. It wasn't until much later, when the flash faded and his body began to fail him, that people started asking the real question: what had Simon Cowell given up to become Simon Cowell? He had power. He had wealth. But slowly, the people around him, those who mattered, began to disappear. His father, Eric, died in 1999, just before Simon's empire truly began. His mother, Julie, followed in 2015 in the shadow of his greatest triumphs. Simon rarely spoke about those losses, but those who knew him say the sharpness in his voice dulled after his mother's death, that he stopped laughing as often, that for all the applause and red carpets he seemed a little less present, a little more haunted. Still, he kept going, because that's what icons do. He launched more shows: The X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, America's Got Talent, each one bigger, flashier, louder. He became a kingmaker, the man who could turn anonymity into arena tours with a single glance. And then, he did something no one expected. He became a father. Chapter 2: Loss, Darkness, and the Void. In 2014, the unthinkable happened. Simon Cowell became a father, not by design, not by meticulous plan, but by something far more unpredictable: love. Lauren Silverman was already someone else's partner when their relationship began, a scandal the tabloids devoured like wolves. But beneath the noise, a quieter, more astonishing truth emerged. For perhaps the first time, Simon wasn't just reacting to life. He was letting it in. And when his son, Eric, was born, everything changed. To the outside world, it looked like another celebrity fatherhood. Expensive gifts, tropical vacations, the occasional red carpet moment. But privately, Simon became almost unrecognizable. The man who once swore children weren't for him now couldn't be without his son. "He saved me," Simon later said in an unguarded moment. "Eric saved me." What the world didn't see was that Simon had been teetering, emotionally, spiritually, for years. The deaths of his parents had cut deep. His father was his silent guide, his mother his emotional compass. Without them, something collapsed inside him. Fame, once intoxicating, began to taste bitter. Success felt hollow. And then came Eric. Small hands reaching up in trust, innocent laughter in a house once echoing with silence, a reason to wake up that didn't involve ratings or contracts. For the first time, Simon began to understand a kind of love that didn't depend on approval or performance. It was, in his own words, 100 times more powerful than anything I've ever felt before. But even as Eric brought light into Simon's life, the shadows were never far behind. In 2020, Simon suffered a near-fatal electric bike accident. It shattered his back in multiple places and forced him into months of agonizing recovery. The once invincible Cowell was now fragile, relearning how to walk, unable to lift his son, reduced to a whisper of the man he had been. The image of Simon Cowell, the eternal judge, the unshakable mogul, was cracked, and beneath it, the man was terrified. Yet even in that pain, Simon kept working, kept showing up. He smiled through interviews, sat upright in chairs with hidden braces, but his eyes told a different story. They held a weight, a fear, a vulnerability no camera could fully hide. In his darkest moments, it was Eric's voice that pulled him back, his son's laughter in the hallway, the feel of his tiny arms wrapping around his neck. It was fatherhood that anchored him, even as the world around him began to change in more harrowing ways than anyone could imagine. Because while Simon was learning to walk again, one of the brightest stars he'd ever helped create was falling. And this time, no amount of power or money could stop it. Chapter 3: The Brutal Blow, Liam Payne's Death. Simon Cowell's world did not just tremble, it collapsed. On a quiet October evening in 2024, news broke that Liam Payne, one of the original members of One Direction, Simon's most successful creation, had died in a fall from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires. He was only 31. The world froze, and Simon shattered. He didn't just mourn a former protege. He grieved for a young man he had known, nurtured, watched grow. A boy he'd seen audition at 14 and guided through the blinding glare of superstardom. And now, that voice, that spark, was gone. Simon's tribute arrived not as a press release, but a confession soaked in heartbreak. "You were kind, funny, sweet, thoughtful, talented, humble, focused. You really cared," he wrote. Not the words of a producer, not the words of a TV titan. These were the words of a father figure lost in the weight of a son he couldn't save. He spoke about their last meeting, how Liam had visited him not for business but to talk, just to be, just to connect. They talked about fatherhood. Liam had spoken of how proud he was to be a dad, and Simon, a father himself, felt that pride like it was his own. He cried, not the kind of tears that fall in polite silence, but the kind that break you, that strip you raw. "Every tear I have shed is a memory of you," he said. The pain bled into everything. Scheduled tapings were postponed. Public appearances were pared back, and when Simon arrived quietly at Liam's funeral, dressed in black, face drawn and exhausted, it was clear something had changed. In the hush of the church, surrounded by the remaining members of One Direction, Simon looked like a man untethered. These weren't just pop stars to him, they were his boys, his family, and one of them was now buried beneath the earth. It was more than tragedy, it was personal, a cruel echo of all the losses that had come before. His parents, his mobility, his illusions. Now, Liam, and through it all, Simon Cowell, the man who had once ruled music television with an iron tongue and a diamond gaze, felt something he never dared admit. Helplessness. He couldn't bring Liam back, couldn't reverse the storm that had carried him away. All he could do was grieve and remember. Chapter 4. Emotional aftermath and the confluence of love and loss. The weeks after Liam's death were not loud for Simon Cowell. There were no dramatic interviews, no sweeping statements. Just silence. A heavy, aching kind of silence. Grief is strange. It doesn't always hit like a wave. Sometimes it creeps in like fog, slow, suffocating, blurring everything it touches. That's what happened to Simon. The man who could fill stadiums with a look now found himself alone in his own thoughts, his own questions. What more could he have done? Where had the signs been? Why had Liam come to him, just to talk, just before he was gone? And all the while, life carried on. Television cameras rolled again. Contracts were fulfilled. Audiences cheered, oblivious to the man behind the judge's desk who no longer felt whole. But if they looked closely, closer than the lens allowed, they'd have seen it. The faint tremble in his voice, the pause too long between thoughts, the smile that never quite reached his eyes. And yet, within that same darkness, there was light. Eric, his son, now 11, was blooming. The boy who had once saved Simon from the void of his parents' deaths was now growing into someone all his own. Curious, expressive, brave, Simon watched him with a reverence that surprised even himself. Backstage at America's Got Talent, Eric wore the show's t-shirt like a badge of honor. He mimicked his father's hand gestures. He whispered jokes during filming. In that boy, Simon saw the very best of himself, unfiltered, unspoiled. And he also saw what he had lost. Liam had a son too. Bear, another little boy left behind in the wake of a world too cruel. The symmetry haunted Simon. 2 fathers, 2 sons, one still laughing in the wings. The other now only a shadow. The grief and the love began to braid together in strange, unbearable ways. One moment Simon would be holding Eric's hand, smiling as they shared ice cream on the walk home. The next he'd be lost in thought, remembering Liam's voice, Liam's laugh, Liam's sudden, devastating silence. Some days it felt like Simon was split in two, the father moving forward and the surrogate father grieving backwards. He began to talk about mortality more openly, to hint, in quiet interviews, that success meant nothing without love, that there were no riches that could replace a son, or the memory of one. And though he never said it outright, there was a look in his eye during the quieter moments in the last few seasons that betrayed the truth. Simon Cowell was no longer building stars. He was trying to hold on to the ones he'd already lost. Chapter 5. The Inner Conflict of a Titan. There are few things more devastating than watching a powerful man quietly fall apart. For decades, Simon Cowell had crafted an image so impermeable it became myth. The man in black, the judge with the sharp tongue, the tastemaker who didn't need approval because he gave it. But now, that image was cracking. Not in scandal, not in defeat, but in quiet, unbearable humanity. In recent years, fans noticed a change. His wit, once razor-sharp, had softened at the edges. The once unwavering confidence occasionally gave way to hesitation. There were moments, brief, fleeting, where he seemed to forget he was performing at all. And behind the scenes, those closest to him whispered of a different Simon. He'd always been private, but now he was withdrawn. His once boundless drive to launch new talent shows had cooled. He spent more time at home, more time with Eric, more time reflecting. The conflict inside him was almost too large to carry. On one hand, a father deeply in love with the small boy who had given him new purpose. On the other, a man haunted by a past he could neither fix nor forget. His guilt over Liam's death was not logical. It was emotional. And it burned, because Simon had built one direction. He had pushed them, protected them, molded them. But fame is a complicated gift. It gives and it takes. And in Liam's case, it took too much. Simon began to question what he'd built, whether the machine he'd driven for so long had, in some ways, eaten its own, whether the very spotlight that made Liam a star had also led him to a darkness Simon never saw coming. This wasn't a tabloid spiral. This was something deeper, existential. He looked at Eric differently now, not just as a son, but as a boy who would one day grow into a man in a world Simon had helped shape. And he feared for him, feared what fame could do, feared what silence could hide. Because Simon now knew, pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it performs. Sometimes it smiles through interviews. Sometimes it laughs at its own unraveling. He recognized that in Liam. And now, he saw it in himself. At 65, Simon Cowell stood not at the height of power, but at a crossroads, caught between legacy and liability, pride and pain. He had built an empire from instinct, but no instinct could have prepared him for this. He was loved. He was feared. But mostly, he was tired. Not of the work, not of the fame, but of carrying so many ghosts. Chapter 6. Unravel. Simon Cowell no longer walks with the same posture he once did. He moves more carefully now. His steps, though still purposeful, carry the memory of the electric bike accident that nearly ended everything. He smiles more often, but those smiles are quieter, heavier. They don't reach as high. The world around him has changed. The industry he once dominated with a single phone call now pulses with new voices, new powers, and for the first time, Simon is not at the center of it. But maybe that's by design. These days, he chooses where to be seen. He no longer courts the cameras, no longer thrives on the chaos of competition. He's a father first, a partner, a man who has known the loudest kind of success and the most silent kind of pain. And what remains in the aftermath of all that noise is something startlingly simple. Love. Love for Eric, whose laugh still lights up their home like nothing else. Love for Lauren, the woman who stood by him not just through scandal, but through sickness, through grief, through change. And even love for those he's lost. He doesn't speak Liam's name often now, but when he does, his voice softens. His eyes shift. There's a pause, like he's trying to summon a memory without breaking in front of the room. He keeps a photo of Liam tucked away, not for display, not for drama, but for something quieter. A promise, a reminder, a tether. And maybe that's what grief becomes after enough time. Not something to escape, but something to carry. Simon has learned that, the hard way. He still works, still judges, still scouts. But the fire that once burned to conquer now flickers only for meaning. And in those rare, quiet moments, when he sits alone on set after filming, or watches Eric sleep in the next room, he lets himself feel it. All of it. The triumph, the regret, the pride, the sorrow. He lets it wash over him, not as punishment, but as proof. Proof that he lived, that he gave, that he lost, that he loved. And that, at 65, the story of Simon Cowell isn't just about a man who built stars. It's about a man who finally learned how to hold on to the ones who mattered most, even when they were gone. Chapter 7. The Close. The stage is empty now. No buzzers, no spotlights, no roars from the crowd. Just one man, alone in the silence he once filled with millions of voices. Simon Cowell sits in the wings, watching as the crew packs up another season, another show, another performance. His hands rest in his lap. His eyes, somewhere else. Perhaps on the past. Perhaps on a boy from Wolverhampton with a crooked smile and a voice that made teenage girls scream. Perhaps on a tiny hand that still slips into his, grounding him in the now. Time has done what time always does. It has taken, and it has given. It has taken his youth, his parents, his certainty, and a piece of his heart he never thought he'd lose. But it has given him something too. Perspective. Stillness. Eric. He no longer measures his worth by ratings or record deals. Not anymore. He measures it in the sound of his son's laughter, in the way Lauren brushes the hair from his face when no one's watching, in the way his voice falters when he says, "I miss him." At 65, Simon Cowell is no longer the judge. He is the judged. By time, by legacy, by love. And perhaps that's the greatest transformation of all. Not the making of stars, not the rise to empire, but the quiet, aching, beautiful undoing of a man who finally let himself feel everything he spent a lifetime avoiding. This is what he's left behind. Not just fame or fortune, but fragments of himself in every artist he believed in, every mistake he made, every moment he chose love over image. And in the end, maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe that's just being human. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.